Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here in Maine, Brian over there in Rhody, and for the first time, we are coming to you in living color with a video podcast. If your podcast player has the capability for video, switch over and you can get a look at us, coming to you live with the good old System Failure Podcast. Brian, how are you doing? It is great to see your face in living color. We are in a whole new era of podcasting here.
I think our handsome mugs are really going to, juice the podcast numbers.
Yes, no doubt our natural, dashing good looks will be the thing to launch us to podcast superstardom. It's only a matter of time at this point, Brian, because we are looking fantastic.
Do people understand that we're tall and that we're not midgets doing this podcast with not throwing any shame on our shorter brethren?
Yes, we're neither. What's the preferred nomenclature? Is it like dwarf these days?
Little person.
Little person, midget, or dwarf. I don't know. Let's ask, Gemini, what is the preferred nomenclature for little people? Little person or person of short stature. The term dwarf is also widely accepted, particularly in medical contexts. The word midget is now considered outdated and deeply offensive. Man, I can't keep up with the what's the euphemism treadmill or condition is. Eventually, society decides to hurl that as an insult, and so we just have a constant cycle where terms that are meant to be sanitized and inoffensive become super offensive because of the way that language is used, and so we've got caught up in that. But yes, to your point, Brian, we are tall, but I just feel like we're both seated at our respective workstations, and like even if we stood up, we would still only see. I don't think people are going to be able to. I think the fact that we're tall is probably a revelation to most of the good System Failure listeners out there in podcast land.
Well, I apologize for my terrible faux pas there, and I'll be sure to use person of short stature in the future.
Yes, that's the key. I don't know. Well, what do you think? Is it better to try to conform oneself to the euphemism treadmill at like every falls out of fashion and an old term falls out of fashion and a new term comes into vogue? What should be our philosophical stance on the euphemism treadmill, Brian? What do you reckon? Should we defy the futile process as infinite and ongoing and never able to be resolved, or best to try to use the terms people have decided are the preferred ones and just try to be as respectful as possible? Not quite sure what the right answer is. It does seem like by agreeing to play the game, you propagate the game. In this game, as I mentioned, is it's an exercise in futility.
Well, like Owen Benjamin would say that they call it spelling for a reason because words are spells, and I think it's obviously crazy that you get castigated for saying certain words, and that I think in a future time, people will laugh at such trivialities. Man, the word retard sure made a comeback after the Tom Brady roast, and now it's back in comedy.
It really is magic words. Obviously, having grown up in the 90s, we called each other retarded nonstop. We call things gay nonstop. But I would never in a bazillion years use the N-word, right? It's even I can rationally say that it's utterly ridiculous that we gave that word. It's just what you're saying. It really is a magical incantation. We gave the N-word, we imbued it with a supernatural power. And it's like we kind of, we white kind of agreed, and after the civil rights movement, that, all right, well, it's totally fine for black folks to say that word, and white people will just agree never to say it. As if that somehow makes sense, right? Obviously, it's a word, like you're saying, and it's not the syllables that are meaningful. It is the meaning with which those syllables are freighted that actually matters. So, you can use the N-word. Obviously, you can use the N-word with absolutely no connotation of suggesting that one race might be inferior or superior to another. And you can tell this by the fact that all of our favorite rap songs have the N-word in virtually every other lyric. Right? So it's obvious that the word can be deployed without ill intent. It's just that we've accepted that it's impossible for a white person to deploy such a word without ill intent, that can't be. And so we really have turned this into a magical word to where using it in any way, shape, or form will create an extreme reaction in the people that hear it. It really is bizarre when you sit down and think about it. And when I was younger, I just couldn't believe that this was actually the case, that a whole bunch of grown adults were like, okay, well, here's the plan. This will be a fine word. People can use it colloquially if they are like black or Hispanic. It's just one race of people that's not allowed to use this particular word. And we're all going to agree to these conversational rules and enforce them socially. It's just, well, I mean, I think you said at the top, Brian, it's an exercise in a real absurdity.
Well, I mean, to be charitable to our black brethren, I mean, I think what you have is like a, kind of this unhealed psychic wound, and that's kind of the crux of the issue. So, I mean, it's not like supposed to be rational, right?
Well, I fully can understand what you say when you talk about a psychic scar or an unhealed psychic wound. Totally with you. But I would think that the reaction to that psychic wound would be like we're all going to agree just not to use this word anymore, right? Now, that I can get on board with. If we want to say this word has a certain historical connotation that we want to get away from, distance ourselves from, totally down. But screaming the word into microphones on every rap album for 20 or 30 years, right? That doesn't really seem like a healing at all. That doesn't. I mean, if the word is painful for people, we should all not be using it versus deciding who can use it by race. Right? Am I making sense here?
Well, I think, I mean, my opinion would be that like the CIA like is involved in like propagating like gangster rap and like just the media that we take in general. But I don't think that it doesn't make sense, though. I mean, with respect to this psychic wound business, I mean, it's like a kind of empowerment. I mean, I think that part I can wrap my head around. I mean, I certainly think in a society like in a Star Trek society where we're past all this. Although, Kurt Metzger was sort of making this point that, like, in a Star Trek society, you can be sure that, like, everyone's being surveilled constantly by their smart devices and whatnot. But anyway, supposing that we had some kind of utopian Star Trek society, I'm sure we'd be past all this. But I think, but I guess I disagree that it doesn't make sense in light of this psychic wound frame of reference.
Well, you use the word empowerment, and I think that's exactly the right word. This is a power dynamic, right? This is why the euphemism right? We've got people who, like, remember the kids in school who were like the hall monitors, right? The narcs, right? The kids who were the tattletales, right? We have a certain cohort within society who just loves enforcing these conversational little people, right? When you can correct people, that puts you in a superior position to them, and it puts them on their back heels in the conversation. And that's what's going on here. This is not about healing some psychic wound, right? This is about controlling language, and some people just love getting into the business of controlling language. Just by way of a small anecdote, one of my darkest hours of the COVID pandemic was at the Cavendish Square Mall in Cape Town, South Africa. And I was in a bookstore. Now, I had my mask on, but it had like fallen like slightly over my nose. And I just remember this mousy, bookish, worker from the bookstore wanted to come up and get me to pull the mask. Like, my mask was not totally off my nose. It was it was in the location it was in specifically. I could pass for having had the mask on. So only an employee that really wanted to go the extra mile to like really inspect masks closely, right? Like an employee could be forgiven for looking at me and thinking that I just had a mask on and moving on with their day, right? But just every once in a while you come up against some little hall monitor who just them in their entire these are the same people that love to push the flashing light button on the crosswalk before they cross the street, and then they take their time sauntering across in their life. Like, people go through their lives and they feel like they don't have an impact on others, or they're not connected to others, or something like this. And then you end up in a situation where you love that other people are forced to stop and pay attention to you in a way that maybe you've been ignored your entire life. And I am sure that if you're the sort of person that's pushing a button on the crosswalk, if you're on a wheelchair or something, well, now I can understand. But if you're the sort of person that just delights in making traffic stop at a crosswalk, or the sort of person who just delights in inviting someone to pull their mask up higher on their nose, well, you're also the sort of person that just loves enforcing conversational boundaries. But I think that's an impediment to communication and comedy and accord amongst humankind rather than a facilitation thereof. If that makes any sense, Brian.
Yeah, well, the Stanford prison experiment is real, but just to your earlier point, well, I'm not saying that the situation, is about healing the psychic wound. I'm just saying, it's downstream of it.
I see. So it's like the wolf with his paw caught in the bear trap is going to snap at the person that comes to try to open the trap, right? That's what you're. So it's like, yes, the aggression is related to the trap. It's not an antidote, or it's not going to heal. I guess that's a pretty good distinction. I guess we're both saying the same thing, coming at it from different directions. Yeah, we're both tunneling onto the prison walls from opposite sides here. But yeah, I agree. It does have to do with the psychic wound. It does not have to do.
I would go with the phrasing that's something to do about empowerment would be what I'd want to say, that's not the most. It'd be best to have us, an African American person come on here and discuss the matter with us, which would be awesome.
Why?
Well, I mean, wait, you don't think it would be awesome to discuss it? I would love to talk about this to someone who disagrees with us vehemently.
Right, well, would they? I do agree. I mean, I got black friends. Maybe I'll ask one of them to come on the podcast and hash this out with us.
Well, maybe they can give us a better perspective. Yeah, that would be incredible.
I think that what they will give us is a far worse perspective, right? This is an example where being close to something makes you subjective, not objective, right? The closer you are to a thing, the less you're going to be able to dispassionately talk about it without bias, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I mean, we're kind of close to it from a different direction. I mean, we're all kind of in this mixing pot or melting pot, I guess you want to say. So we all have to deal with this issue. I think we all have a certain, racial awareness. I mean, you're always going to notice if you're the only white person in the room or the only black person or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, we have skin in the game to some extent.
Wow, what a turn of phrase.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm just saying that we're two white people trying to say how black people should feel about this, and I do think that's a point worth observing. I mean, I would think that any sane person would agree that this would not be an issue in a post-racial world where we're past. It's sort of easy to have this conversation without someone here to really push back. Just as two white people who live in New England, right?
Yeah, but we're white people who love rap music, so we need some kind of a resolution to this vexing topic.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Maybe we can solve the issue here on the System Failure Podcast. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I would not accept from anyone of any color who came on this podcast and talked about it with us is this idea that the word must be freighted with ill intent, or must be freighted with the assumption that some races are inferior or superior to others. Because it's obvious that the word can be deployed, right? It's like, what I wouldn't accept is someone coming on this podcast and telling me what I mean by words, right? The reason I would never use the N-word is because it was a societal norm in the 90s, and it just feels so. I subscribe to the magical properties of the word to that degree, but rationally, I know that what we're doing here is we're playing a game of conversational power and power dynamics between people, and I just wouldn't really be willing to accept that it's anything but that. Now, I understand that it's definitely about that it's related to a psychic wound or the kind of civilization we had just within living memory, just 50, 60 short years ago. So I can totally get that it's a reaction to that, but I could not accept that it is somehow a rational or a helpful or healing or in any way brings us closer to the utopian future to which you optimistically refer, Brian. This business of trying to police conversational rules by race, right? That is no way to get to a post-racial society.
Yeah, well, the way to get to some kind of post-racial society would be to have the conversation. I for one, hope the podcast gets popular enough that we can have Cat Williams on and
Cat
get to
Williams.
the bottom
Well,
of this. That would be a best-case scenario.
It'd be a good follow-up to Dr. Michael Hudson. I'm with you. Oish. All right. Well, Brian, I suppose we'd ought to we'd ought to move on unless you have the final word on race relations in America. Unless you have a final comment, I'm ready to move on to the next topic here.
The Cat Williams is all I got.
Okay, well, it was pretty good. I enjoyed that one. Although I thought the skin in the game joke was the best bit of the pod so far, but we'll see. Hopefully, we can top that joke. The next topic of conversation here is indeed a hilarious joke. That is that the Donald's much touted plan for signing an agreement with the good people of Iran to get the Strait of Hormuz reopened to shipping traffic has completely collapsed yet again. And why has it collapsed? Well, it's because the Israelis, they just can't seem to leave southern Lebanon alone. God, no matter how much the Donald calls up and curses out the Israeli Prime Minister, a certain Benjamin. It seems like since Israel is a client state of the United States, we ought to be able to have some influence. But if you thought that, then you would be wrong, because once again the Israelis ended up in a conflagration with the Lebanese in Lebanese territory. The Israelis have fixed the Golan Heights, I think in the 70s, right? Isn't that how long the Golan Heights, formerly part of Lebanon, now part of Israel, goes back to like the 70s? But now the Israelis have moved substantially farther north than the Golan Heights and are invading Lebanon proper, or at least Lebanon proper as defined since the 70s. And they don't seem to be willing to give up that crusade. And because the Iranian, the security of the Lebanese border, and because they're making that part of their conditions for reopening the strait, the Trump administration finds itself in quite a pickle, eh, Brian?
Yeah, well, I think it's the War of '67, right? Isn't that when the Golan Heights were taken in that war with Egypt or what have you?
Yeah, but that was right. Yeah, I guess it was 67, and then in 73 the Egyptians fought back. Now I'm mixing up my history between 67 and 73.
All right,
but one of those years, the Israelis they managed to take over the entire Sinai Peninsula and the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights.
Those are both years that momentous Pink Floyd albums came out. It was The Piper at the Gates of Dawn in '67, and of course Dark Side of the Moon in '73.
Can't be a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was, for one, excited about the things that the Donald was saying shortly after it seemed like we were going to have some kind of peace agreement with the Iranians. And I felt, somewhat vindicated about my comparison to Lando Calrissian, because he was saying the Iranians basically have a right to defend themselves, and they should be allowed to get missiles, and that the Israelis should not blow up so many housing complexes, right?
Sorry, you were saying that it would be nice if we could not blow up settlements and housings and civilian populations, and I said that it would be nice if they could refrain. And then you said what?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, I guess. You got to think that the Donald will continue to up his rhetoric, because I don't think he wants to be in this war, and the Israelis are obviously trying to force his hand.
Yeah, I think in the news this week, I was seeing that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is getting down there. We have only a couple of weeks left, and also we had now this week the bond rates have relaxed a little bit because everyone's optimistic that this war could come to an end. Prices for both West Texas crude and Brent crude are down into the 80s, where they were both over 100 a couple of weeks back. And so I think that Trump is recognizing that he has a political worse than his 28 point approval rating would suggest. And so I do think that the Trump is I think he's getting more and more desperate to end this ridiculously ill-advised military misadventure. And I think it's but he's got an issue because the Israelis refuse to behave, as you observed, Brian, and so it's really going to be interesting to see where we go from here. How comprehensively, in your estimation, that makes it so that we can't possibly threaten to withhold all the foreign aid we send out to Israel every year to the tune of billions of dollars? Like, why can't we threaten to remove our military protection and support from their ongoing wars with virtually all their neighbors. Why is it that we can't? Why is it that we can't treat Israel like the client state that they are? What do you think?
Well, I would think that the Donald's reelection, it was like the consummation or certainly the zenith of Israeli influence or Zionist influence on American culture, where you have the Donald getting, millions of dollars from the Adelsons. And
Just one Adelson, because
One
with
Adelson.
the Mr. Adelson, the casino owner, is up and died, so it's just Miriam, his widow, writing checks to the Donald, eh?
Yeah, and then, well, obviously his daughter Ivanka is married to Jared Kushner, and they have all these crazy dealings going on with like the Trump coin, and it sounds like a lot of intertwinement there. And so, I think it's going to be a very difficult situation for the Donald to extricate himself. But it seems like the Donald's tipped his hand. There is this idea that Glenn Greenwald was talking about, or he was pondering this question, because some people are suggesting that it's just supposed to be a ruse, and the plan is to go back and bomb Iran some more. But it seems like we've done that as much as we can do for the most part. And it's like in Vietnam, you can go and napalm the jungle, and they're just going to kind of go underground and then come back out. So I don't know. I just don't know. We need to stage like a giant land invasion, right? If we're going to try to change the status quo here.
Yep, that's it. There are severe limits to the projection of military power by the air. Like you say, you can drop bombs and carpet bomb, but ultimately, if you're going to take over a place, take over someone's city or country, you're going to have to do it with boots on every single street corner, and that's just absolutely brutal and costly. And there's no way that the American people have the stomach for such a thing, and I don't think there's any way that the Trump administration would be foolish enough to try it. The idea that there's some 4D chess going on here or some kind of a ruse, I just can't really believe anything like that. It just doesn't seem here to me. Would you disagree with that?
Well, I think that this week was just kind of a turning point. Just the Donald, I don't know, I think it changes the zeitgeist when he goes out there and says that Iran has a right to defend himself. And so the ceasefire is not in place, I guess. Because I think the deal was in place on Friday. I'm not exactly sure when they went back in and started bombing Lebanon some more. Do you know exactly? Was that Saturday morning?
Yeah, it was. So it was early Saturday morning our time, but Saturday day their time.
Where exactly we? I think that they'll be sort of prosecuting the matter this week, or I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be like a new round here. I think it's going to go down this week. I think the story will progress here. We were just kind of meandering, going in circles there, and now it seems clear that I don't see how you could say that obviously the Donald just wants to end this war. I think is what you'd have to say after the last week, where it wasn't entirely clear if that's what he actually wanted to do or not. But now it seems, I think the zeitgeist has turned, it really it changed for me anyway, and I don't know if that's naivete or what, but I guess my prediction would be though that it's gonna go stuff is gonna happen this week.
I imagine that the American relationship with Israel is going to have to evolve this week. That's what I imagine happening. I'm not quite sure if it'll evolve or devolve. It has to change. Either the Israelis could fall in line and be like, all right, well, we're going to lose the support of our patron state, the United States here, if we don't start respecting their wishes. That's less likely, and what's more likely is that there are structures of power over and above our nominal heads of state. My favorite turn of phrase on the System Failure podcast is that. and I think that those power structures, right? I don't think that either the discretion to remove American financial support from the Israeli project, because I think that comes from I think that comes from the international banking houses who run international geopolitics the way the popes once ran international geopolitics during the Middle Ages. So I'll be watching closely, and refreshing my Wall Street Journal feed with feverish enthusiasm to see just how this whole thing shakes out this week, Brian. I'm really curious to see, and I think that it's our relationship with the Israelis that has to be redefined, as mentioned.
Yeah, I think you said it. It's either going to evolve or devolve. Yeah, I don't know if there'll be some giant scandal about the Donald, and he'll be declared unfit, to be president, or if we're going to double down, or I don't know. Like, I don't know what to make. I mean, the zeitgeist seems to have turned on these assassination attempts as like staged events. But it makes you wonder in moments like these when, these structures of power above the nominal heads of state are like clearly, I don't know. You'd have to really have your head in the sand at this point to not understand about these things, and so. Yeah, man. I'll be there with you. Hitting that refresh button.
Yeah, buddy. All right, well, Brian, there's been some other pieces of news this week. Actually, one of these pieces of news is a couple of weeks old. We've been trying to get to it on the pod now. We just have had such interesting conversations. I haven't been able to shoehorn in this exciting development, but there's a new scientific study or research paper from Nature Research that got published in February of 2026, and so I have only discovered it last month and wanted to make sure that I pass this information along to all of our good system failure listeners. This has to do with the hypothesis that the Kykeon, the sacred elixir of the Eleusinian mysteries, contained psychedelic compounds, and the particular psychedelic compound that is supposed to have been mixed into the Kykeon is ergot. Okay, so we need to establish a little bit of background here. The first is that the cult of Demeter at Eleusis. Eleusis is this little town. It's 14 miles due west of Athens. It's right there on the water, and it's a little fishing village that sits on the edge of a vast plain where the grain that historically fed the citizens of Athens was grown. This site, Eleusis, it's like as mentioned, it's the site of the temple to Demeter, and Demeter, of course, is the mother goddess who's also the goddess of grain, and the story goes that her little virginal daughter Persephone, was kidnapped by Hades, the dark god of the underworld. A crack in the earth opened up, and Hades emerged from the crack and snatched the little girl while she was plucking flowers and dragged her down to hell, where he made her his queen. In the meanwhile, Demeter, the sorrowing mother of the virginal girl Persephone, searched the world over for her lost daughter, and it was finally the crone, the old woman with the two torches that symbolize intellectual illumination, is the one who led Demeter through the crack in the earth. At Eleusis, there really is these weird cracks and crevices that go down and just disappear into the blackness. And to this day, people come around and leave the pomegranates on these ledges or crevices, or they drop them into the well there. What's the significance of the pomegranate? Well, when Demeter finally arrived in the underworld to rescue her lost daughter and bring her back to topside to our world, it turned out that the little girl had somewhat grown fond of her new role as queen of the underworld, and so on the way out of town, on the way out of Hades, she ate 6 pomegranate seeds. And the thing about eating food in hell is that it means that you must stay there forever. And so for that reason, Persephone, the little girl, is bound to return for half the year to Hades, and then above ground, her sorrowing mother, the grain goddess Demeter, forgets to make the plants grow, and so it becomes a Greek myth that explains the change in seasons and the coming and going of the growing and harvesting seasons. So the Kykeon, right, the center of the worship of Demeter at Eleusis, it's not like some obscure cult. It was massive. The religion that was practiced there didn't really have an official name, but Christianity took a lot from it. It's like the wine of the wine god Dionysus and the bread of the grain goddess Demeter are what's combined into the Christian Eucharist, still worldwide. Now, for over 1,000 years, anyone who was anyone in Greco-Roman society went to Athens, did the fast, did the traditional 14-mile pilgrimage from Athens out to Eleusis, drank the Kykeon. This, it's like this is where the stories of the Holy Grail comes from. They drank a mysterious liquid out of this cup. Now, we all remember Homer, the guy who supposedly wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Right? There was actually 7 of these epic poems. We have only 2. They were all said to have been written by this guy Homer. Really, what you're talking about is oral poems passed down generation to generation, and Homer is the mythical author. We kind of ascribe all of that to. And one of the old Homeric works is the Hymn to Demeter, and in this Hymn to Demeter, she did the witch Circe makes up the Kykeon, and it's like barley and mint and water. It's like a thin beer-like substance. This Kykeon is also mentioned in the Odyssey. The witch Circe turns Odysseus' men into hogs, as you may recall, and she has the elixir of immortality, right, as part of her story. So at any rate, in reality, away from mythology, over at Eleusis, right, the theory is that they were consuming psychedelic compounds that dissolve the ego and subject the pilgrim to a vision of reality from the vantage point, from a universal vantage point rather than the vantage point of self. And for this, the pilgrims to Eleusis often referred to themselves as having been saved. Okay, so what's the scientific report? What's the scientific paper that got published here? Well, the problem with ergot, right? The ergot is the magic mushrooms. It's a fungus that grows on cereal grain, like barley. And the thing about ergot is that it's horribly painful and possibly fatal to ingest. So the scientists that did this study tried to recreate the production of a Kykeon that would not kill the initiate or the pilgrim, but would induce the beatific vision, which is the goal. And the way they did this was by dissolving it in lye, the same thing that you make soap out of. And they were able to successfully create a compound using nothing but that which the ancient Greeks would have had available to them, namely lye. And they used the lye to dissolve the ergot and turn it into a completely benign potion. And so what we have here is a completely not a what the hell is the name of it? Hang on. Sitting in their monasteries and copying the illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages, right? These are the guys that understand how to brew alcohol successfully, right? It's like I forgot the name of the monks in the pass in the Pyrenees Mountains, but was it the Dolomites? I can't remember, but like the stories of the Saint Bernard with the barrel of alcohol around its neck that's going to come out and find you during the snowstorm, right? That's because it was the monks who understood how to create manuscripts and the monks that understood how to brew beer. To this day, brewmasters the world over must test for ergot all the time, because a little bit of ergot in the beer will straight up kill all your customers and destroy your beer company. And so the monks, it was also the monks who understood how to treat ergotism, and so people got accidentally infected with ergot, and their muscles were all seized up, and they were dying this horrible death. You would take them to the monastery, and hopefully the monks could fix them. And then the last piece is here. There's a famous Eisenheim altarpiece. I think that's in the Netherlands. I'm not sure where Eisenheim is, but if you look at that altarpiece, it's a picture of Christ on the cross, but he's dying of ergotism. He's all black and green and blotchy. It was a theme of the Middle Ages, ergotism was. So anyhow, Brian, I thought that was really interesting stuff. I mean, it really is starting to become clear. Art called the Eisenheim altarpiece. And in fact, we can bring it up here. The Eisenheim altarpiece, it's like Isenheim. And it's got a picture of Jesus on the cross, but he's dying of ergotism. And so, I can see it. I got it pulled up here. This thing was painted in the early 1500s. and it's on display in France and Alsace, and it was painted for the monastery of Saint Anthony in Eisenheim. And Eisenheim is a commune in northeastern France, so it's not in the Netherlands. It's in France. But yeah, it's quite a picture. I don't know if you're able to pull it up there, Brian, but our man JC has rarely looked so bad. He's really got a serious case of ergotism.
Hey.
That is definitely it. Yep, it sure is. It's a triptych, so there's 3 pieces to it. That's only the middle piece. But yeah, that's JC suffering from ergotism. Yeah. Pretty wild stuff. So I was fascinated to hear that in the year of our Lord 2026, scientists were able to create a kykeon using just using lye, like the same thing that soap is made out of, just using lye to render the ergot complete. So you're not going to end up like JC there, all blotchy and with your limbs all racked and at odd angles.
I just have to say, I mean, it's not really clear from the picture that he's ailing from ergotism versus like crucifixion in general. But I mean, that must be the point, though.
Yeah, doesn't he look green to you? He's all blotchy. His fingers are all like extended at the crazy angles from people who have the weird muscle contractions from ergotism.
I mean, that must be. I mean, I could, if you were on the cross for a couple days and expired, you might look like that also.
So the specific monastery that this altarpiece was painted for, the monastery of Saint Anthony in Eisenheim, and now I'm reading to you Wikipedia. The Antonine monks of the monastery were noted for their care of plague sufferers as well as for their treatment of skin diseases such as ergotism. The image of crucified Christ is pitted with plague-type sores, showing patients that Jesus understood and shared their afflictions. The veracity of the work's depiction of medieval art. So anyway, ergot, man, it's I think that it figures prominently into history, and no one realizes it, or we're just starting to appreciate the titanic impact that had on our own history. Is Jerry Brown and his wife? I think her name was Judy Brown. One of them is a doctorate, one of them is a master's degree. They wrote a whole book called The Psychedelic Gospels, and in the Psychedelic Gospels, these guys detailed how. Well, they went through the history of medieval art, and they showed all these examples where Jesus is literally rendered as a mushroom. It's odd. Like he doesn't have any arms or legs. He just has it's like there's a whole bunch of examples of it. And according to the Browns, the Christian church didn't even pretend that it hadn't been about ego-dissolving drugs and magic mushrooms from the outset until the time of the Inquisition in the 14th century, right? It was like they had all this stained glass artwork from the Middle Ages that just clearly shows the connection. They'll show mushrooms in the Garden of Eden or Jesus as a mushroom, all this religious iconography involving mushrooms. And it wasn't until the church started to lose control of their intellectual and spiritual monopoly they held over all of Europe through all of the Middle Ages, right? The screaming in the dungeons of the Inquisition. And so that's when the church decided that it needed to emphasize sobriety and cut ties with its psychedelic history. I cannot get enough of it.
Yeah, well, it's too controversial. It doesn't feel too controversial to say. I mean, it seems like it obviously has something to do with it.
Well, yeah, it's. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I mean, I don't know. You know, like the Alex Gray artwork.
That sounds familiar. Why can't I remember what Alex Gray's artwork is?
I mean, I think he does the album covers for Tool, and I don't know. Joe Rogan talks about him, but he does. Hang on.
He does the psychedelic artwork. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he got like faces made up with a bunch of like. It's just like mini faces and whatnot, and obviously there's something about it where your ego dies and you are able to sort of bear witness to, or you certainly reach like a deeper level, or it's not like your regular calcified ego type thing going on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's like it is like the ego is important. It's what makes the world intelligible, but ultimately, ego is a filter, right? You're filtering out all these other potential vantage points to experience one single vantage point, and that is instructive in and of itself. But when the ego dissolves, you're left with a multidimensional view, a multidimensional conception. Is striking, and it literally happens at the level of the visual cortex, where you can see like your brain. Your brain creates these vast star fields or alien landscapes that that seem very, very real in the moment. And actually, this does lead into our next topic of conversation, Brian. I wonder if you heard this man Chase Hughes on the JRE number 2515. This guy has been on the JRE before, but he's the guy doing the DMT studies where they're using an anesthesiology or DMT dose to what do you want to say? To perfect it or to optimize your DMT dosage to keep you in the DMT state for hours on end, whereas just smoking or vaping DMT would give you just a few minutes of experience.
Well, I want to talk about Jesus some more, but I did listen to the Chase Hughes podcast, and the guy, he was able to do like a dose that would last for like 6 hours, or I guess if you smoke DMT, it's like some kind of 20-minute type affair.
Well, let's talk about JC a little bit more, Brian, and then we'll turn our guns on Chase Hughes and the JRE.
All right. Well, I think, or I guess I wonder if... Well, I think if you listen to like Christians who aren't talking about ergot and psychedelics. Well, I was listening to who was like a priest or something. He just had him on the other day, and he's he's advocating for churches like not being tax exempt, and he wants them to like the book should be open, and you should know how much the pastor like gets paid or the priest or thing than like these super churches where they just harvest the churchgoers for as much as they can, basically. And
it's a fine tradition going back to the sale of indulgences during the Middle Ages. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
And he was also talking about how obviously Jesus was chasing the temples or what have you, like with a whip or what have you.
In all four Gospels, he assaults the moneylenders who dare to change coins in the Temple of Solomon. And in the Gospel of Luke, he actually thrashes them with like a whip. He grabs a weapon and gives them what for?
Yeah. So obviously the whole institution is like horribly corrupt and is, it's become like a caricature of itself. All right, it's like if you actually like read the Bible, you would see that there's like obviously something wrong with this arrangement, and what the man is advocating for, obviously, it sounds like something I'd be much more interested in being a part of. Like I could obviously, I could never be part of like the Catholic Church or something. If you had some kind of open institution that was like trying to do good. And that would be that would be something I could consider being a part of. But anyway, like he was talking about how like the agreement changed with our man JC, and I guess I wonder like what that would mean. Like if they're obviously operating under some kind of something prior to Jesus, although it's like unclear if like Jesus is supposed to actually be a person or not.
Well, hang on a second. When you say the deal has changed with respect to JC, can you just hash that a little bit? I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, let's see. He was saying, like Jesus' last words on the cross are like, it is done or something. And I guess the whole point is that, we're supposed to be like absolved of our sins or something. Our agreement with God has changed or something.
Okay, so the view here is that the New Testament is like a firmware upgrade or something like this, like the deal that humankind has with the covenant humanity has with God. Right? This is fundamentally changed at the time of the crucifixion. This is the Christian idea to which you refer. Have I got that right?
Yeah, and I guess what I'm wondering is, have we completely eroded like what that was, and now it's just completely lost? Or is the agreement something we're sort of implicitly aware of, and is there like you got to imagine the conditions for evolution or something would cause change. I guess what I'm trying to say is like we live in this age of technology now, right? And it's like obviously like the printing press like caused like crazy societal changes, right? And so we are going through something here with technology and AI and all that. And well, Joe Rogan makes this point how like we're gonna laugh in the future that you had to like carry around a phone. Like that's like our integration with technology or something is going to become much more replete in the near future, right? And wouldn't that kind of paradigm sort of mandate or be a catalyst for some kind of new conception of ourselves and our relationship with the universe or something?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right, Brian. I would just say that the forgiveness offered by Jesus Christ or demanded by Jesus Christ or commanded by Jesus Christ, I think the forgiveness the forgiveness, the message of forgiveness that Jesus brought to the Roman Empire, he was there in the eastern reaches of the Roman Empire, the outer rim of the empire. There in let's see, I think that they didn't rename it Palestine till after he left. Syria Palestina was the name of the Roman territory, but be that as it may, I think it was still Judea or something during Jesus' lifetime. But I think that Jesus was living through the collapse of the Roman Empire. He was prophesying the collapse of the Roman Empire. He was there to, in other words, prophesy about Armageddon. And Jesus, the forgiveness that he suggested as the alternative to Armageddon, right, the end of all things, the salvation, if you will, was literally the debt forgiveness baked into the Hebrew Old Testament. And the Hebrews got the idea of the debt forgiveness during the episode of the Babylonian captivity in the late 6th century BC, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar came to town, destroyed Jerusalem and hauled its Jewish inhabitants back with him to Babylon as war prizes. But within a few short decades, right, there's always a bigger fish as the trope in Hollywood, and so it was with the Neo-Babylonian Empire headed up by Nebuchadnezzar, because Darius and the Persians arrived to conquer the Neo-Babylonians in short order, and they dispatched the Jews back to Jerusalem, where they rebuilt the Temple of Solomon, the so-called Second Temple that lasted from this period all the way up to the destruction of the same by the Roman general and future Emperor Titus in 70 A.D. It was about 500 years of the Second Temple period here. Now the tablet, I think it's right there in the Code of Hammurabi, right? It's the storm god Adad, right? The rain god Adad fails to water the crops, and there's a drought on, then no one has to pay their debts in that year, right? So, and the reason is because all of the money lenders, like lending money, is crucial for getting an agricultural society off the ground, right? If you can't start a new farm unless someone loans you some seeds, right? That's how human civilizations, spreads. So like loaning of money is in the old days was silver, in the Babylonian period was silver, what's going to happen is when you have a natural disaster, or if there's a war, a famine, or a plague, or something like that, something that makes it so that the crop harvested is smaller or not than it used to be, or non-existent, like say a foreign army comes and devastates the fields, right? Well, what's going to happen is that the money lenders who have all of the mortgages on all the properties, right, are going to be able to foreclose on all that property, and you'll end up with just a tiny handful of people owning all of the property of society. And even worse, in those days, right, you didn't if you couldn't pay your debts, you became literally the slave of the person who you were indebted to. You had to work to pay off your debt as a debt slave. And so that's why the Old Testament talks about raising the torch of freedom. Right here, notions of freedom are closely integrated. It's why the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia is stenciled with the debt jubilee on it. Every 50th year shall be hallowed unto thee. It shall be a jubilee unto you. You shall, return people to their land and return people to freedom, restore their liberty, something like this, right? So that is what Jesus Christ was on about. That is the true forgiveness that he was advocating for. It wasn't until the 300s, the 4th century, when St. Augustine of Hippo, this bishop from North Africa, reinterpreted the forgiveness demanded by Christ to mean forgiveness for personal misdeeds. You went on the P-Hub, and so you're going to say sorry to God, and then that's how you're going to be. That's the forgiveness that like St. Augustine, he spent his youth as a rake. He was pursuing wine, women, and song. But then when he got older, he felt bad about all of that, and so to him, the way to to the way to get closer to God was through moral improvement. And so his idea of forgiveness was the one favored by the Roman oligarchy during the twilight of their civilization, right? Because his version of forgiveness didn't mean that to them by the multitudes of Roman working. The rich oligarchy didn't really feel like giving up those debts. Versions of forgiveness, which 1,000 years later would lead to the sale of indulgences, right? Where the church literally is like collecting money from people for sin forgiveness or sin remission. So instead of forgiveness being an occasion for rich people to get less wealthy and poor people to get wealthier, right? An equalization of society. Instead, forgiveness becomes an opportunity for rich people to cut a check to the church for their Pornhub, usage or whatever it is that's plaguing their conscience. And so that, I think, is when you think about it in those terms, it really becomes interesting. Now, where does the ego factors into this, right? Part of it was Plato who identified pleonexia, or wealth addiction, as the perennial ailment that kills societies. And it's interesting, like, it really is like the hoarding of wealth, right? The addiction to wealth. Like, you can be addicted to food or to wine, but you can only eat so much food and drink so much wine before the hangover sets in, right? So whereas wealth addiction, it's just a straight spiral of addiction. There's no hangover period to moderate it. And being sick with wealth addiction is really being sick with ego, right? You're using the wealth to aggrandize your own ego. And what we really want is not for people to be so attached to their calcified egos, right? What we really want is an economy that works for humanity in general and not just people who perceive themselves as individuals, a few of those types of people. So that, I think, is what's really final. Man, you really hit the nail on the head when you brought up the printing press, because in the Roman Empire, one of the main reasons that Christianity spread so readily was their early adoption of the Codex, or the bound book. Up until that time, all writing was done on scrolls, but scrolls don't have a table of contents, right? If you take that scroll and whack it up into hundreds of pieces and then put a table of contents that directs you to the piece you're trying to find, well, that's a lot more efficient than scrolls. And so the fact that early Christians were early adopters had an advantage over the imperial authorities. They were able to coordinate from different sides of a massive empire, right? The most massive empire history had ever seen. They were able to coordinate they were able to create a coordinated challenge to Roman power. That thing happened, right? The Roman Catholic Church emerges from the fall of Rome as the authority in Europe, and but then they eventually calcify into a similar wealth-addicted authority to the Roman one that early against. Right now, they're talking about the end of the Middle Ages and the rise of the sale of indulgences. And then we had, the main reason, like the Bible, as you said, Brian, Jesus is he's talking about how it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's in 3 Gospels out of 4, right? And like we already talked about, Jesus is chucking moneylenders out the temple. So it's meanwhile, the Roman Catholic Church during the Middle Ages is building up a massive hoard of wealth that is legendary to this very day. You just have to go over to the... It's uncomfortable because actual scripture is it is harshly condemning wealth accumulation, and meanwhile the Roman Catholic Church is piling up wealth sky high, and so that's an uncomfortable juxtaposition there. And the way the church got away with it was by people could actually understand. Right? You weren't supposed to have Bibles written in common languages. It was all supposed to be in Latin. It wasn't even until 1963 that the Roman Catholic Church finally started doing their mass in common tongues instead of, rather than in Latin. And so when the first, when people started to detect that maybe everything wasn't on the up and up with the church during the 1300s, the Black Death played a big part in that. The church was ostentatiously powerless to stop the dying indulgences, which did seem like naked corruption because it was naked corruption. And but the first people the first rebels, right, who translated the Bible into common languages, John Wycliffe in England during the late 1300s, and Jan Hus in Prague in the early 1400s. Right, these guys defied the church and said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and translate the Bible into English. For John Wycliffe, it got so extreme that he advocated for a propertyless communist society in late 1300s England, right? He was so shocked by what he read in the New Testament about it, in the way that it castigated wealth accumulation, that this was his proposal. Well, I guess we're going to have to start a propertyless society. That seems to be what the apostles are saying in the New Testament. But see, the thing about John Wycliffe, he became an enemy of the church, but I wrote in this week's system failure essay that enemies of the Roman Catholic Church rarely achieve the feat of dying of old age. Right? Usually the church tracks them down. But England was kind of far from Rome in the 1300s, and it took about 30 years for the church to realize what was going on in England. And by the time they excommunicated and condemned John Wycliffe, he'd already been in the ground, 30 years. And so he'd managed to die of old ages. I think it was like the very last day of 1393 he died, December the 31st. Well, he inspired Jan Hus to translate the Bible into Czech over in Prague, and in 1415, the Roman Catholic Church summoned Jan Hus to Constance, Germany for a council under a guarantee of protection, but they tied him to a stake and burnt the flesh off of his body anyway for his literary crime of translating the Bible, and this enraged the citizens of Prague so much that a couple years later, the Hussites marched on the new town hall there in Prague, laid their hands on 7 of the town's Catholic administrators, and chucked them out a second-story window to their painful death on the cobblestones below, and it was the first defenestration of Prague. But none of these things destroyed the supremacy of the Roman Catholic Church in terms of political power. And it was about 30 years after Jan Hus met his horrible grisly fate at Constance, Germany, that Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press. And so the next great Bible translator, Martin Luther, the mad monk of Wittenberg, the super grumpy, friar who compiled his 95 complaints against the Catholic Church and nailed them to the door of his local church and there in Wittenberg, Germany. Right, that, his act, unlike Jan Hus and John Wycliffe, it was the presence of the printing press that amplified Martin Luther's message and spread it to every single corner of Europe. And it's interesting to me that it's like the wealth addiction of the Roman oligarchy is what leads to the rise of Christianity, and then the wealth addiction of the Roman Catholic. Man, remember, Brian, when Aaron Eckhart has that line, you either die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain. That's exactly what happened to the Roman Catholic Church. They started out as heroes, and they lived long enough to see themselves become the same kind of villain they once fought against. So, I don't know. What do you think, Brian? I've been going on for a while.
Christianity in Israel was everyone Jewish? Was that how it worked in Israel?
Yeah, it was yes, it was run. Israel was run by. I think there are probably other people living there of other religions, but the majority were Jewish, and the whoever it was that ran Judea, right? The rulers of that province were Jewish. It was a Jewish territory.
All right. Well, see, I think that. That Jewish people, I think, have a certain relationship to God or something that's different than Christians, and also different than Muslims. And those are just the major 3 religions.
How would you characterize that difference?
Well, hard to say exactly. That, other than I'm pretty sure it does exist. I guess. Obviously, emancipation. Financial emancipation from enslavement in general.
Yeah,
I think is part of what this change meant. And obviously, I think, the ergot in having this vision that Alex Gray put on paper somehow is part of it. It's just awfully suspicious that this person, Jesus from 2,000 years ago, we're still talking about this guy. But also, our conception of history, the people can't agree, what the history of Egypt is, and, apparently there are giant chunks of history that are missing and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this whole question of, what's going on with these UFOs, and, is it crazily rich people, the people who... But you have these crazily rich people who have been controlling society for as long as we as a people can remember. I think, I don't know. I think, I guess I'm just thinking about, what would it mean to have some kind of spark that, changes our relation? Part of that would be the financial emancipation is certainly a chunk of. I think I don't know, man. I think I'm just inclined to believe that we are on the precipice of cataclysm, and
Well,
that
that's why we
like
call it system failure.
a dramatic change in our that we can't really comprehend is gonna come forth. And I don't know, like it's crazy. Like this crazy business. It'll be like crazy, like the Iranian people. Like, and this is like a powerful people, man. I mean, we really like poked the bear here. I mean, it's crazy that like Iran is going to arise as a power like in the Middle East, and I mean, I think all this conflict in the Middle East. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's like I don't know. I think we're due for revelation or something. I guess is just the feeling that I get.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's interesting that it is, like I was just telling the story of the Babylonian captivity a few minutes ago in 598 BC when Nebuchadnezzar came and razed Jerusalem and the first temple of Solomon and brought the Jews back with him to Babylon. Who was it that swept in a couple decades later and restored the Jews to Jerusalem? It was Darius and the Persians, the same people that the Donald has decided to bomb in 2026, ill-advisedly.
I mean, to the earlier point, I mean, it's hard to really say like how a different people's like relationship to God is different, but I mean, you can kind of tell that like Jewish people are different than Christians and that they're different than Muslims in some way. I mean, it's hard to describe what it is, but there's just kind of a different way to their being, and I don't know. I guess what I'm just saying is I don't know. Like, I just think we're on the precipice of some new way of being is what I'm trying to get at.
The fishermen off the Greek Isle of Naxos in around the 1st century AD.
No.
Do you ever see Westworld, that TV show from a couple, 5-6 years ago?
I certainly heard a lot about it, but I don't think I really watched it.
Bicameral mind theory. Have you ever heard of bicameral mind theory? This is the center theory of Westworld.
No.
Okay. Well, the idea is that the idea here is that there are multiple parties inside your head, right? Do you ever talk to yourself? You ever ask yourself, Brian, what the hell did I just get up and come in this room to get? A moment ago, do you ever like, or are you like, do you like have an internal dialogue like that?
All the time.
Yeah, most people do. We're talking like there are multiple entities riding around in each of our heads, and I think in the olden days they used to think of that like, right? Isn't that what Socrates is talking about at his trial, according to Plato, right? He's at his trial talking about it, the inner daemon, this voice that tells him what to do, that tells us what's right or wrong. Well, I think that I think that the Greeks understood that to be the logos that you mentioned before, the logos who's mentioned so prominently in the Gospel of John, which is nothing but a Greek philosophy turned into Christianity. And I think that it was the case that people used to think of that voice as a separate entity, right? It really comes down to how you conceive of as yourself. That's why ego-dissolving drugs are so important to the history of religion. It's your conception of yourself. What am I? And if you think of that logos as just your Jiminy Cricket conscience, that's one, just part of another faculty of my mind. That's how we tend to think about it. But the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks thought of that as the logos, the word of God, the word that calls the universe into existence, the logos. And so the story about the Greek fishermen off the Isle of Naxos is that it was like the 1st century AD, and they were bringing their fishing boat home to port, and they heard a great disembodied voice say, "Behold, the great god Pan is dead," And from that point, the logos is supposed to have fallen silent, so no one could hear the voice anymore, right? Whereas people before the 1st century AD literally heard the voice of God in their mind and recognized it as such, we have moved into a place where that voice is, we can still hear it in our mind, but it's not audible. We don't think of it as a separate entity to ourselves. We conceive your comments about changing your relationship to God reminded me of, because it's really about changing your relationship to yourself. Ultimately, that is what we're talking about here. What is it that I am, and ultimately, and there's nothing that gets to the heart of religion more than that question, eh?
Yes, I think that's what we're in store for here.
Yeah. And it does seem like we've become so sick with ego, right, that the pleonexia cited by Plato in the 450s BC as the main ailment that that killed. Right? It was there's during the fall of Rome, Platonism became way more popular than it ever had been during Plato's actual lifetime 500 years prior, and that was because they were watching their entire civilization collapse into pleonexia. Right? It was easy to. It's why Christianity arose and became so popular. It was easy to believe that the Armageddon was at hand, and it's because people were sick with ego. Right? They were. The ego was so calcified in people's minds that they were willing to destroy their own little bit of wealth for the sake of longevity or the sake of societal or economic sustainability. And it's interesting to see that the same thing happened in the late Middle Ages. Right, the church succumbed to pleonexia, and because of that, the Protestant Reformation, which, by the way, was the worst thing that had ever happened until World War I came around, right? It was like the 30 Years' War that came from the Protestant Reformation was just, armies marching back and forth across Europe and slaughtering whole towns and villages depending on whether they were Catholic or Protestant. Just millions of people dead, just absolute misery for 30 years. Well, that gave the slave society of Rome collapsed under pleonexia, right? And then we had a fundamental change in our conception of ourselves, aka the coming of the New Testament, the updated firmware. And then the same thing happened when the feudal society that arose from the ashes of Rome, when that feudal society started to circle the drain in the 1300s and the Protestant Reformation of the 1500s started to happen, right? You had the collapse of the just as you had the collapse of the slave-based Roman economic model, 1,000 years later, you had the collapse of the medieval feudal economic model, where people did work as either lords or peasants, right? As lords and serfs, created the dawning of a beautiful new age, right? The coming of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and finally the 20th century. But here in the 20th century, the economic modality that arose out of the collapse of feudalism, right? Just as feudalism grew on the bones of Roman slavery, so too did the capitalism of the Industrial Revolution grow. But now the life cycle has completed again, right? In medieval feudalism, where it once was the plucky young upstart, right now, much like the Roman Catholic antiquity, and so the hour is growing late. Just as you said, Brian, we are marching towards the final curtain call of capitalism, and that's going to entail some chaos, like the 30 Years' War or like the fall of Rome when Alaric the Visigoth sacked the Eternal City. But it's coming for us too, right? And so it's really interesting to hear. It's really interesting to see the way that Christianity also, like the Book of Revelation, talks about the end times and the changing of the era. It really is. It's something else. And so I say all that to agree and echo, Brian, with your observation that we are marching. It's like that. It's like the Irish poet William Butler Yeats wrote. What rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? So yeah, I mean, it's a great observation, Brian. And I interrupted you to say it earlier, but that's why we call it the System Failure Podcast, because the failure of our economic system is going to change our conception of ourselves fundamentally, and therefore of reality itself.
All right. Well, is there anything else we should say about Chase Hughes here?
Yeah, we promised to get back to Chase Hughes, and so about his appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience was his dream thought experiment. Now, I've often had the idea that what you could do in your dreams is get out your accelerometer, get out your ruler and your stopwatch and start doing physics inside your dream, right? And that would be interesting because there'd be no real guarantee that the physics that you measure and record in your dream would be consistent, right? It's like you're creating the entire thing with your mind. And so to begin working a physics experiment in your dream would mean you'd have to forget that you were in a dream, right? It's like you would have to believe that you were encountering some kind of you were using your calipers to measure bedrock reality in some way, shape, or form. So this Chase Hughes character was on the JRE talking about dreaming and seeing things in your sleep when you're dreaming, right? What you're doing is creating a visual field the way that it would look if you had eyes. Right? So essentially what's going on in your dream is you're creating eyes to see, you're creating an object, and then you're creating eyes that see that object, and you are convinced that the object is a certain distance from you in your dream, when in reality no such distance actually exists. The entire simulation is made of pure consciousness, right? There's no matter there, right? And just as there's no matter in your dream, there is no distance in your dream, but yet you can experience the distance just as you can during your waking life. And so that really goes to show that distance is some kind of a construct that depends on your perspective, depends on your point of view, dare I say it, depends on your ego, right? To create these, to fabricate these distances for you to experience, just as your brain effortlessly creates distances for you to experience in your sleep. You can never get enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, his point was that, yeah, I mean, like, measuring distance is equally futile in our own world, where obviously it's made of consciousness on a different level. And, yeah, I would agree.
This was, of course, Plato's great contribution to history. This idea that the dualism, the Platonic dualism, that there's two worlds out there. There's the world that you think you're experiencing, in your like the place where you decide to make a ball your hand into a fist. Well, there's a place where a hand actually turns into a fist, and that's all well and good. But it's obvious that the place where you decide to make the fist and the place where the fist actually meant the basis of Christianity. Literally, St. Augustine was a devoted Neoplatonist before he made the conversion to Christianity. And the idea, the different schools of Platonism were concerned with how one might make the transition from the imperfect, flawed, and fallen world we perceive with our senses to the idealized realm that we can make up in our mind. Like, how do you cross the bridge from one realm to the next? Well, the answer, according to St. Augustine, was moral improvement. Another answer, according to the Hermeticists, was the great work, right? You own a great work of art, or a great work of, like, a great construction project, or some kind of a great work is the way to make the Platonic ascent between realms. But it's very interesting to me to observe that Christianity is is a subcategory of Platonism itself, and how it really shows how integral Platonism is, in Greek philosophy in general, to Western society, when you start to realize that Christianity is just one department of Platonism among many possibilities that the Roman government outlawed during the fall of Rome because they wanted to bolster their waning political power by, sanctifying Augustinian Christianity, Nicene Christianity, Roman Catholic Christianity as the one true faith, and all other faiths are heresies, right? It's very likely, it's a near historical certainty that the original Christians were all burnt as heretics, or all killed as heretics, because of the way that political power works.
All right.
Oof. Well, Brian, I see that we are way past our normal hour allotment here, but this conversation today has just been, it's been pretty interesting. So the hour flew by for me. I hope the same can be said of you and of our plethora of system failure listeners out there. So I will do my traditional diatribe here and just invite all of you out there in podcast land to come pay us a visit over at systemfailure.org. There you can sign up with your email address to receive the weekly essays written by yours truly right there in your email inbox each and every Sunday morning. And also, you can get in touch with either Brian or myself and let us know what you think of the illusory nature of society, reality, existence, what have you. And you can accomplish that tidy feat on the About page simply by clicking on the appropriate name. And with that, we're off. I will be back on Thursday with a System Failure short essay read. And then, of course, Brian, you and I will be back on Monday morning, inevitably, for another edition of the good old System Failure podcast. Can't wait to see you all then. Have a great week.
All right, see you.